Hello, my name is Adelene Cheong. Welcome to today's live session and conversation on how are we doing with practicing and teaching yoga online, and how will this potentially take us through this year 2020 and beyond, and further and beyond. What I would like to share with you today, covering a few topics that I've prepared, and of course I would really, especially with this conversation, I would really encourage your participation and share with me how you are doing with your online practicing or teaching. So some of the things that I would like to cover in this hour is to talk about intention, as we decide what mode of channel that would like to practice or teach, to consider exclusivity or inclusivity, the accessibility in terms of location, time, resources, and also the nature of content that is being shared, like within the context of yoga. And more importantly is personal comfort and preference also. So I'll hope I'll be able to cover some of these with you and have a short discussion with you in terms of how we are at the moment practicing teaching, and also going forward, whether it's appropriate or how much, how little are we depending on moving some of the online teaching, sharing into the digital world as we move forwards from the second half of this year and going forwards. So firstly, maybe if I could just look at where you're dialing in from, just seeing how are we doing in terms of connecting, just being here in itself, being on this live with me at the moment talking. We are dialing in from like different places, of course within UK, and then some of you from Europe and from Asia as well. Yes, hi, hello, those of you who are just joining. And this medium itself, this Facebook Live, for example, or Instagram Live, enable us to be able to connect through this way, communicate through this way. Yes, from Dublin, Yorkshire, yes, Lucy, yeah. And the thing is, when we consider practicing and sharing teaching yoga online, I was in researching how to bring this forward and have this discussion. I actually was looking at how is yoga being shared all these years, like thousands of years ago until today. So a little bit of history. I'm not a yoga historian or scholar, but from research from different online resources, books, and from my experience and study, that you can imagine 5,000 years ago, where yoga first even just appeared, surface, they were only presented on tablets, on like stone carving and tablets. And that's really the only mode of like sharing or exchange. And then of course it went through thousands of years of evolution and how yoga is being continued to share. Just talking about more recent years, probably about 100 years ago, 100 years ago, that was the first group yoga class. And that was also then that Krishnamacharya, which doesn't need any introduction, when it's also about the time that he was starting to teach at Mysore Palace, and that's where group yoga classes first emerged. Before that, we can imagine that there's a lot of learning through just one-to-one, unless there's a teacher and disciple kind of following that the student or the apprentice will need to almost move in and stay with the teacher and apprentice with the teacher for years as a spiritual practice. And when does it become like a group class, and what's the intention of having a group class at that point? Why did it not remain as a one-to-one, or probably just a like from verbal teaching than eventually having books, which is about Light on Yoga was about 70 years ago, more than 70 years ago. That was Mr. Iyengar's book, where yoga is being shared, then simply popularized to the whole world, translated into different languages at that time, and shared through books. So there are texts, there are books that we can share yoga, learn, and practice. And some other modes are, especially in today's world, we have books, we have online journals and articles, we have, of course, the internet. And I'm jumping a little bit ahead already, but just to say that group classes, from that point, when we move into introducing it widely in the West, that is about 60, 70 years ago, when it's being introduced to the West, there is a shift. And what I'm thinking, I'm just thinking out loud now, from a place of studying yoga, which is somewhat exclusivity, unless you study with the teacher or the master or the mentor, guru, to a place where Krishnamacharya has encouraged his students to share it widely beyond India. And that's where the popularizing of yoga allows it to move into, from an exclusivity perspective to a more relaxed inclusivity. So from exclusivity to inclusivity, where we are intending, at least at that time, not me at that time, but Mr. Iyengar, his disciples, and many other who brought yoga to the West, it's wanting a little bit more inclusivity of the wider population beyond India to share and study and practice yoga. So pause. So that's quite a journey from sharing yoga verbally to practicing it and apprenticing with the master teacher, to then popularizing it into group classes, and in the West and onto TV programs even, and books that are widely available. And think about why did it get translated into different languages? Just because we want more people to be able to access it. So accessibility is definitely one of the consideration, how we choose to consume, learn, share, practice yoga. And at least during that time, there are not many opportunities to be able to access teachings of yoga until much later stage, where about 40 years ago, at least 40 years or thereabout, where yoga studios start opening up. There are more in the West, where California and West Coast, in UK, Europe, slowly there are a few bits and blobs of yoga studios coming up, which is just before that there were like TV programs that advertise yoga as an exercise program. But really, when the yoga studios start opening up, I'm really seeing the shift in terms of wanting to make it even more widely available, rather than waiting for Mr. Iyengar's one visit or Parabi Joy's one visit to the States in order to practice with them. And that's where more yoga schools are available, and more people could practice, just come through the door and practice yoga in studios. So thinking about that, like just rewinding, like when you first started yoga, where was your first class? How did you first start it? Was it a one-to-one setting that you managed to meet someone and resonated with the teacher and therefore continue with? Or did you walk into a yoga studio and that made yoga available to you today? Or was it simply an article that you picked up from the media or online? Maybe a book that someone shared with you. So I'm seeing that there are many options and avenue that lead us into yoga, and each of those has its place, value, and preference of how we consume or we prefer to learn. Some may prefer to learn through reading, through books, and some would feel strongly that unless it's in the presence of another, that we could actually transmit, share the energetic experience of the practice. So Carolyn was sharing that this with her grandmother when she was a child in the bathroom floor, and she gave you a book. Yes, yeah. And Amy was saying that it's 21 years ago, group classes in a space on Crucifix Lane. Yeah. Yeah. So if it weren't for that opportunity, that we might not land ourselves where we are here with others sharing yoga through these different channels. So some of the ways I just wanted to recap that I've kind of consolidated, at least what I have also been through and study yoga myself, is yes, definitely through books. Someone just recommended a book, and then you picked up the book, you start reading, you start studying and learning about a little bit more about different expression of yoga, whether it's from philosophy or anatomy or breathing practices, right? From definitely from online articles. Now really the World Wide Web, the internet existed 30 years ago, just about 30 years ago, and that's pre-studio. So I was saying that studio started, like bits and blobs of studio started about 40 years ago, but really about 30 years ago, that's when internet began to really become more publicly available, that people start having email addresses and internet addresses, domain. YouTube really started only 15 years ago, and that was really when that online material resources get shared more, like widely. But of course, beyond the online stuff, there are also, of course, in-person learning. I also learned through the years through assisting, like being in the presence of my teacher, assisting my teacher, mentorship and apprenticeship through that mode of learning, in person, of course, and also through exchange of emails. Now that we have this gadgets and devices and internet, that I could also communicate with my teacher via like online, right? And of course, all these online offerings which are pre-recorded or live stream. So these are some not conclusive, but there might be still other channels that you can share with me, think of that, how we could continue to share or practice yoga. So Misha was saying she took her first class 10 years ago. Yep, her mom brought her there, and yeah, so word of mouth from another person's introduction to yoga also. So definitely, yeah. And years ago, my sister-in-law brought me to a yoga class just down the road in Malaysia back then, and that was when I started researching more about yoga and books. And yeah, at that time there's already internet, so I can research a little bit more. So I was just moving into the online yoga. When did it started and how did it get popularized, and then now last 3 months. So I was saying that YouTube really started only 15 years ago, thereabout. And that's when a few years later, like really very shortly, 2-3 years later, I saw like people start sharing yoga content on YouTube that that is available to like anyone to watch. And within like a couple of years from then, so 12 years ago right until now, that different online platform offers yoga classes online on demand or live stream, and that especially on demand pre-recorded yoga classes. So some of the familiar names, you know, that are Yoga U online, Yoga Glow. There's Eckhart Yoga, definitely. Movement for Modern Life is, well, that's about 7-8 years ago too. So there's just introduction of these smartphones since 10 years ago that becomes even more accessible, because we can now just watch it from like a mobile, just going anywhere rather than on just the computer screen. Yeah, first class during lunch break at work. Yeah, that's probably why yoga is strongly associated with relief from stress. Yes, thank you for sharing. Yeah, from London. Yeah, local gym with yoga teacher. Yeah. Yeah. So firstly, take a moment now to consider the intention of you coming into yoga at that point. Like, why, how did you land yourself, or did someone just gift it to you, shared it with you? And if there is maybe there was an intention, maybe it was just like so happened that you land yourself in a yoga class, thinking that it's maybe simply wanting to have another activity or exercise class, and someone said that it's really calming, peaceful, relaxing to join a yoga class, maybe. And when you consider the intention, and then now, given the opportunity that we have so many options, I mean, at that time you had options of like maybe books and a couple of like yoga studios down the road, and it depends on what's available to you, depends on what's accessible at that time, also available to you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I would like to hear from you actually. How do you feel now that I've shared? Like, it depends on what is available to you at that point when you come to yoga, or how was it introduced to you at that point? And considering now, today, just 3 months ago, suddenly there's just an influx, like every other yoga teacher, I mean, not every, but many yoga teachers or yoga studios has brought their classes online. How are you feeling right now? Just being where we are, arriving where we are right now, considering the history of how yoga is being shared. Are you feeling joyful because there's opportunity now to be able to share it this way? Or is there's also an element that I'm feeling of grief, that there is some part of how I used to practice, used to teach, used to share yoga, it's now kind of not gone, but it is it's not even replaced, it's not even being substituted, but there is being challenged that there are other ways that I could now practice, teach yoga than just being in person. So Carolyn was saying that it's accessibility, you're really enjoying the accessibility of it. And yoga has been my lifesaver throughout my life since then, through second child, through emotional and physical challenges, and now, yes. So being here alone, those of you who are interested still until now, I trust and believe that yoga has a significant part to play, and therefore you are here to continue practicing, teaching, sharing, and you're passionate about the sharing part of yoga. Yeah. So let's talk about the intention of sharing and which mode would be most appropriate, or probably preferences for different people. Firstly, when I start a project, whether to decide to teach online or to even pre-record some online content and resources to be shared, I step back and think about what's the intention of doing that. Is that maybe for educational purpose? Depends on the nature of the content. If the content, the nature of the content is educational or practice-based, does it require, or does the content, if I'm choosing that mode of sharing, whether I'm sharing through writing an article or a book or online or in person, I have to consider also, does this require any hands-on contact, which then I'll have to decide which way of sharing is more appropriate, whether that it's appropriate to bring it online or not, or safe to bring it online or not. The nature of content is important to consider. The accessibility is important to consider. So for example, in terms of time, location, resources. So for some, it could be simply a book that it's most accessible for them to be able to learn and to receive yoga. And for some who are more fortunate, they could potentially mobilize themselves, get to a studio. It really depends on your personal commitment. It really depends on the accessibility, location as well, and other of your life circumstances to allow you to make it to the studio to practice. Whilst there will be some who would say that, yes, I'm all dedicated and wanting to practice and wanting to teach yoga maybe, but my time schedule is just not allowing me, or probably at this moment in my life with family commitment or other commitment with being a carer or caring for parents or others are limiting certain accessibility for you to get to the studio in person with the teacher. And also considering my intention, if it's about exclusivity or inclusivity. So this I briefly mentioned at the beginning, that there are hundreds of years ago where some of these teachings are is sacred and only limited to certain groups of people to access, to be able to practice and have access to the guru. Whereas as we move to the West, there is an intention of wanting to relax that bit of the exclusivity, and inclusivity comes in. And now with online offering, I'm really thinking, this is going through my mind, that it's about really embracing inclusivity. Those of you who are practicing and sharing yoga, teaching yoga online, you're really thinking, I'm hoping that resonating with some of you, that it's about really wanting to reach a wider audience or students to be able to share yoga. And one thing I want to step back and say that not that online yoga is substituting in-person learning. They are simply two different modes of learning. Just like years ago when we were learning yoga, sharing yoga through books and in person, right? And now through books, in person, and also online. It's an additional channel of sharing yoga. Whether it's here to stay, again, as long as there are practitioners and teachers who has the intent to share, with the intent of inclusivity, to share this knowledge, this practice, and definitely as long as online resources are still available, I believe that it will be here to stay as an additional option for teaching, sharing, practicing. What do you think? Yeah, Beth say it's fantastic for her to be able to attend classes with teachers that usually have to travel to London for. So accessibility. So she's celebrating. I'm hearing that there is opportunity to be able to access yoga that is not local. In terms of her teaching her classes, I've been teaching for nearly 30 years, and taking my teaching online overnight was pretty crazy. Yes, there is a part of us that habitually used to a way of learning and sharing yoga, and now with this, I mean, it has been here actually for the past 15 years and all, as soon as like internet is available, and then YouTube is it's there, and everyone's launching everything and putting everything online, an online platform for yoga classes. But for many of us, we are still deeply connected to in-person practices, in person with in the same space, sharing the same space, energetically connected through the practice in studios or one-to-one. And therefore, suddenly, like now, 3 months ago, where everyone has to be isolated in your own place, that in order to continue practicing, in order to continue sharing, we work with what we have, what is accessible in this moment, to be able to continue practicing and teaching. So yes, Amy was saying that I love the inclusivity of teaching online. Yes, that's definitely it. But then, well, I want to also talk about then the content, whether it's appropriate and which channel is appropriate for sharing. There will be some content that is more appropriate to be shared in person, and there will also be things that we could extract and to be shared in books. And some might say that through books there are certain things that we just simply couldn't communicate unless it's actually animated. It doesn't justify itself through photos or through like just words for some. And some content I meant, or probably depends on the nature that you're of the content that you're sharing. And especially some practices, if it requires much input with hands-on contact, some of the somatic work or hands-on support, that will have to be reserved when we're in person, when we are one-to-one or in group classes in studios, that we're able to access that content, right? Whereas there may be some content that it might be simply available through online sharing, where especially when it's verbalized, or probably in a way translated in a way that it's guided through interoception, which is a huge part that I enjoy practicing and teaching through interoception, and educating others, my audience, my students, in terms of how to navigate their practice, how to sense and feel and make a choice, decide on whether to deepen into the pose or to come out from the pose a little sooner, or to completely change another position. So in terms of that, I feel more comfortable in terms of sharing and teaching yoga online. Whereas if they are, like I said earlier already, that requires my hands-on education in terms of somatic education, then it might not be so appropriate or not as effective to be able to share online. So consider the nature of the content that you are whether consuming as a practitioner or to teach. Right? Some of the things you can demonstrate across the screen, and the other person you can explain a little bit, and the other person across the screen will be able to understand and practice with you. Hi to Regina. Hi Sarah, thank you for joining. So I was just sharing. I would like to come into a little bit of a conclusion now before our meditation. It's really a self-reflection and meditation practice, so that we can come home to ourselves and really feel what is most appropriate for ourselves in terms of practicing and sharing, teaching yoga. But just a conclusion from what I was just sharing in the past half an hour is, consider, as we move into different mode of sharing yoga, whether it's through books, in person, in the studio, or online resources, whether that is pre-recorded or live stream, whether that, like for example, YouTube would be a pre-recorded, often pre-recorded, and there's also option for live right now also. Whether there is, for me at least, I really appreciate the opportunity to study and practice and learn yoga through apprenticeship and mentorship with my teacher. So that is irreplaceable with any of the other mode of like just simply reading a book, for example. There's this personal connection with my teacher that I'm able to continue shadowing, apprentice, and with those channels and mode of learning in place, consider then what is your intention, and therefore choosing which is most appropriate for you to practice or teach, the intention. And also the intention includes exclusivity. Is that content that you're about to share or practicing an exclusive content, or is it an inclusive content that you would like to share it publicly, widely, and therefore might dictate whether you're choosing to post it on YouTube, which everyone could just access it, or is it something that it's by invitation? So by invitation to your, maybe through Zoom or through a close online offering. Yeah. And consider also accessibility, and therefore the channel mode of sharing. So that could be, again, dictates whether that's going to be in person or online or through books, articles, and also how many times you are able to manage to get to the person. So for example, I see my teacher once a year because they're just like miles away from me. They're in like San Francisco in New Zealand. But throughout the year, although I spend like a couple of weeks with them every year, apprentice and assisting my teacher, throughout the year I have resources like books. I have maybe email exchanges with them. Through online we have conversation, and those are a few things that continue to support me in terms of me learning, sharing and practicing yoga. And consider also the nature and content, whether it's appropriate, which channel is more appropriate for you to share or practice. And ultimately, more importantly, it's personal comfort and preferences. So what mode serve best for you to study and practice or teach yoga? Do you feel comfortable simply studying through books, or are you comfortable teaching, sharing online? What's the reservation? And if there is a slight reservation, if there's a slight aversion and concern, think about, there must be a need underlying that aversion that needs to be addressed or met, or probably a completely another channel of learning or sharing or practicing. Might not be online after all, right? And I really observe also that have been teaching online now, especially live stream classes, that there will be through Zoom, usually there'll be a little screen where you can see your student practicing and their setup and movement. And there will often be a few students who prefer to not have their video on. for any reason, I respect that. For any reason, for personal preferences, they want to have yoga, they want to come online to attend the class, but there is a certain part of maybe privacy, maybe self-consciousness, maybe like different reasons that I respect, that maybe not appropriate for having the video live online, sharing it with other people who are on the screen, who can actually see you across the devices. So consider what's comfortable for you in terms of your practicing and teaching also. Okay, so that's all I wanted to share and say about the evolution of yoga moving forward, especially after this 3 months of explosion of lots of online content. It's overwhelming, lots of online content. And how do we, with discrimination, pick the appropriateness of things that we are able to practice and share and teach via this channel. And it doesn't, again, I want to emphasize that I feel, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself, that it doesn't replace my in-person experience and learning with my teacher, or for me to teach in studio with in person with my students. Rather, that this has allowed now me to reach a wider audience, especially making it available and accessible for students who are not local to where I'm teaching, physically teaching. And I do teach in Europe, for example, so I'll have students like in Amsterdam, in Brussels, in Korea. And for those students, I mean, I do visit Amsterdam still twice a year. Hopefully this year I've only been once. Hopefully end of the year I get to go again to see my students there. Those of you who are in Amsterdam, yeah. And also in Brussels, in Spain, Austria, in Vienna. So those students who often I get to meet only once or twice a year, now weekly we can have classes. Weekly they are able to access and come to my online classes and continue to practice more on a regular, consistent basis, to support them in terms of whether it's inspiration, consistency, and motivation. So I am really appreciating, and you can hear there's a little bit of celebration in terms of how this has opened up another avenue, opportunity for me to be able to share and practice that way. But of course, there are, like I said earlier, there are certain content that might not be easily or accessible online, which I'll have to reserve that then to live events, which I still really enjoy. I really appreciate and enjoy being in person, sharing the same space, and sharing energetically sharing the space and learning environment with students, which is irreplaceable. So let's consolidate our thoughts now. Hi Lian. Let's consolidate our thoughts for a moment, and I'd like to invite you maybe to come into a comfortable seated or lying down position, as long as it's comfortable for you for the next 10 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes or so. I'd like to guide you through a short relaxation process, dropping into our deep innate being and connect to that place, to be able to listen attentively and allow the expression, the deep inner awareness to express itself. What's true to you? How is this evolution? How is this movement of sharing yoga from stone tablets to texts, sacred texts and Upanishads and Vedas, to publications of books and articles, to making it available, group classes in studio, to online now. It's a journey. It's a journey, and it's just making it's a little bit, every transition of this is just making yoga a little bit more accessible and widely able to share with others. So let's take a seated or lying down position if you haven't already. Are you ready? Just give me a little thumbs up. As long as you can hear me clearly, you don't really need to look at the screen from here on. Okay. As you sit or lie here comfortably, know that at any time you wish to make small changes, adjustments, in order to get that little bit more comfortable, or even completely change position from sitting to lying down, feel free to do so. Take care of yourself with kindness. That you're welcome to listen to as much or as little of what I'm offering or my words of sharing. And as you lie here, just allowing yourself to settle. You have arrived here, this moment, right now. Appreciating all the experiences, all your learning, all your yoga, years of practices, cumulatively, that brought you here right now today. And through generations of sharing, so how you have received yoga, how your teacher has received yoga, how your teachers' have received. And it goes way back. From different accessible method of learning, sharing, till now. And take a moment to consider, if someone would ask you right now, what is yoga to you? What does the word yoga mean to you this moment? That you are practicing yoga, that you are teaching yoga, maybe sharing. What is yoga? What does this word mean to you? Maybe it's a way of living, a navigation system for some. Maybe it's physical, it's quite physical to take care of your health and well-being. Or maybe it is a refuge, emotional, mental refuge. For me, all of the above, all of the above. That yoga show up in our lives, different moments, different time in our lives, serving our needs, And if this is your understanding of what yoga is, if that's your definition, understanding how you would express this word, what is the reason why do you practice or teach or share yoga? So consider your intention for arriving here and now that you are practicing, sharing or teaching. And what is your intention if you're teaching? And therefore, how are you doing this? How are you doing this in terms of practicing or teaching at this moment? Are you content? Are you content with what is available, accessible to you right now to continue practicing, sharing, teaching yoga? Allowing yourself to simply rest back into being yoga. Being is enough. That all the reflection, your answers, reflection are valid and important to you. There is no right or wrong answer from the questions. But simply to stay true to your intentions. As you move into your practice, teaching or sharing yoga, to stay true with your intention. There may be appropriate time, place, channel of practicing, sharing, teaching that you yourself feel comfortable. So take time to honor that. To honor your deep, heartfelt intention that you have come to this practice, that you're sharing this practice. And there's just various different channels some may be more accessible to you than others to practice, teach, or share. Stay true to your intention. And slowly deepen your breath to bring yourself back into the room. You can blink your eyes open. How are you? I hope that was helpful in terms of consolidating our thoughts, in terms of having a moment to self-reflect what yoga means to me, to you right now, and what the place that it holds in my heart right now, and considering how I would like to continue. I'm definitely going to continue, but how do I continue practicing, sharing this, and considering what's appropriate, what might be more effective to be via books or online and stuff. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Adrian. Hi, Jamie. Hi. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. I hope that conversation was helpful for us to reconsider, reevaluate what has already arrived, which is this online sharing of yoga, whether that is recorded is old news, but really lots more live stream stuff. And if there are any reflection that you would like to share, or you'd like to talk to me more about, please do type it into the chat box or email me separately. I'm really passionate about continuing to share, just with different channel mode that I feel comfortable and ready. So it's not just because online is available that everyone jumps into the online bandwagon, but more importantly is until I feel comfortable that, okay, these are the content that I would like to choose to share, these are the content that might not be as effective to share it online. So I'm really evaluating as much the appropriateness of what is being shared online. Yeah, thank you, Beth. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for your participation. For those of you who are interested, there is a workshop I'm offering this Friday afternoon. It's about intention. It's called Every Beginning. So if you're interested in that, is also one of the keystone of how I was saying earlier, that I encourage students into interoception so that they can connect to their intention and safe practices. And it's really about inviting this Every Beginning workshop is really about inviting the other, or whoever is across the screen, the other person, to meet themselves where they are, and to reconnect with their intention, not my intention that I set for them, but their intention for arriving at the practice. whether that is self-practice or whether it's across screen and devices practice. So if you're interested, it's on my website. I'm happy to talk to you more about that if you email me. And thank you for your participation, contribution today. Namaste, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, rest of the week. And stay well, stay well. Namaste.